It's really nice to be looking out at such bonny faces. Most of you recognisable to me. Not because you've been in trouble, but more like because I've been in trouble. While I have the opportunity, a big thank you to Urban Mission Network for hosting this today, and Christine and her team with impeccable rigour putting this day together, and many thanks to Pilgrim too. So, a code of ethics for church councils. Why on earth would we need one? What do you reckon? Okay, recognise this? I don't have time for this, Stan. We'll talk about it at the business meeting. Or this. Or perhaps this. Hey, I wouldn't want to confront Mrs. Schultz either. And that reads, visiting the museum, Pastor Harrows realises he needs a new suit. Welcome to the church. Would you care to join a coup against the current pastor? Pastor Bob submits his vision for our 21st century church to his 20th century church board. Why is this proposal on beige paper? Wouldn't a staple be better than a clip? Why on earth is it double spaced? So I'm wondering, without incriminating yourselves in any way, what are the sorts of things that trouble you about life together in a church council? Just a brainstorm, and we'll come back to it at the end of the session. Yes? Too much business. Not enough listening to God? Is that? Yes. Let me put another little word in there. Discernment. Okay. Other things. Keep them coming. Keep me busy writing. You've obviously all got it sorted. Yes. What about anger? Conflict. Now, of course, none of you would put this up, but I will. Bullying. Okay. Frustration. Would you like to tell us about that? I ought to put my glasses on so I can see who's talking to me. Sorry, there you are. Hello. Let me... Yes. Let me... See, I'm going to be the nasty person today, I know. Like, you're just such nice people. You wouldn't say these things. But let me use another word. Secrets. Power blocks. And over there? There was somebody else. Yes. Rivalries. Really pretty picture of Christian community, isn't it? Can I put entrenched roles? And I can say this, my dad was secretary of the elders at Enfield Church for close to 40 years. Bad, terrible. Aha. Yes. And there's another word with what you would have heard it in my sigh. Weariness. Ah, there's something that needs a bit of unpacking. Yep. Tell us about.
We only have one meeting a month.
Yes.
This meeting, organised with something, takes half a year to get stuff sorted.
Yes.
Are we going to be able to get copies of this later, please?
You think it'll reassure your church council, do you, that they're not quite so different from everybody else?
Understanding of the regulations of the United States.
Oh, yes. That'll probably do us, I reckon, and we'll come back to it at the end of the hour that we have. So I think that rather than try and introduce ethics in any depth to you, because it's part of what we live and breathe, but for me, living by an ethic is like being on a never-ending pilgrimage from a grand hope to a real challenge, and then journeying all the way back again into idealism so that we tackle the next crunch of real life. So it's a bit like the arteries and the veins, you know, as the blood goes around the body, that there is real life that takes the oxygen out of our blood, and we need to pump more oxygen in, and around it goes and around it goes. And rather like the skater doing the perfect figure eight, we may begin in the real world and do our reflecting into the world of ethics. We may turn ourselves around in the world of ethics, and if we live in the real world, we have to go right along in the other part of the figure eight and deal with real situations. So being an ethical person means engaging in the rigour of dealing with what we believe and what we know and what we value and what we know is right, and the challenges that we put those values and beliefs to as we try to live out our life together in the human community. So, but we've been resolving some of these things by having rules for a very long time. We have the Hippocratic Oath. I know that's a bit small, but a set of rules that has lasted. It's been changed a little along the centuries, but for a very long time. And in a little while I'll talk about some basic principles of ethics, and you'll see they're reflected in the Hippocratic Oath way back, 460 to 370 BC. I will never do harm to anyone. In every house where I come, I will enter only for the good of my patients. Keeping myself far from all intentional ill-doing. Things that I am told I will keep secret and never reveal. So there's the confidentiality one. And I keep this oath. If I keep this oath faithfully, may I enjoy my life and practice my art. But if I swerve from it or violate it, may the reverse be my life. So there's an element of oath or promise in the Hippocratic Oath, of course. What an old-fashioned picture, isn't it? Where is it? What is it? The Sermon on the Mount. Okay. And of course, I'm reminded of the Benedictine rule. One of many rules, of course, of life set up in the early church, became very popular in medieval times. and the Benedictine rule, which was a way of guiding the monks as to what was the right way to live. The ethical question has always been, how then should we live? And the question for us this morning is, as church councils, how then should we live? So when we talk about ethics, we are trying to get in touch with our values. So, an affirmation of life, the importance of community. If I hadn't put that up there, I'd be getting you to tell me what you think those values are. And if I could put it on blank, I would, but I can't. So there you go, there's my list. What are the things that matter most to you in the way that we live our community? Make up your own, don't take from mine. Inclusion, very strong value for many of us. Acceptance. Respect. Yep.
Honesty.
Yes. Caring. Okay. And of course, the foundational ethic for the Christian community is the ethic of love, loving God and neighbour. What I want you to do is to sit there for a moment. We're not going to talk to anybody, just you talk to yourself for a bit about where does the rub come for you in loving your neighbour, especially on a church council. Okay, where is the rub? You're not going to have to tell me a thing, okay? No, it's not confession. But I want you to be thinking about it in a personal sort of way. Is there a person? Is there a piece of behaviour? Is there something that happens that sends you off? Inside, of course, you're far too well behaved to show it. Just put that over there to one side just off to the side for a little bit. It always surprises me that we talk so much about love in the church. Of course we do. It's why we exist. And yet, sometimes when we're doing our business, when we're actually doing our organising, we find it really hard. We love because God first loved us. But love is not simply giving, says Scott Peck. It's judicious giving and judicious holding as well. It requires judgment, and judgment requires more than instinct. It requires thoughtful and often painful decision making. So what I'm asking you to do is, when you think about what rubs you up the wrong way, is that I'm not saying, well, just love. I'm not saying, okay, we're told to love. Jesus is our example. Love is our calling. Love is God's design. Off you go, just love. Loving means more than instinct. It requires thoughtful and often painful decision making. So there is work. There is work for each and every single one of us to do when it comes to the ethic of love, when we live and work together. So, quick 2-minute lesson in ethics. 4 basic ethical principles. These things were put together in the 80s, I suppose. It's very shorthand and very inadequate, but it'll do for our purposes. 4 principles that you will find common across religions, across humanism, and across our secular organisations when they talk about ethical behaviour. These are the sorts of things they're talking about. In our Western society, we value autonomy. So in our behaviour with one another, we try to give people choice, to take responsibility. We respect individual rights. Okay? The second one is beneficence, in other words, doing good. The intention to do good at all times. Not so easy, actually, because we may find ourselves in situations where there is the lesser or the greater good. And how do we work out what is the lesser or the greater good? And I reckon if you're thinking about the last controversy in your church council, it was about the lesser or the greater good. The third principle is non-maleficence. I love that word. I'm probably a bit weird. And it means not doing harm. Okay. So a lot of our secular ethics are at the bottom, not doing harm. So our ethic around abuse, our ethic around domestic violence, our ethic around traffic rules. Okay, they are based on the ethic of non-maleficence. In other words, not doing harm, preventing doing harm to one another. And often when trying to work out which is the better good, it's too hard, we resort to, well, what is it that's going to do the least harm? All right? You with me? Everyone with me? Okay. And then the fourth ethical principle is justice. Our intention to be as fair, as equitable as we can be. And out of that, there come 4 rules. Veracity, telling the truth, and we've heard a lot about that already in our brainstorm, that we value honesty and truthfulness. Fidelity, keeping promises. Confidentiality, keeping secrets. I don't like that definition of confidentiality, but it'll do for the moment. Privacy is about maintaining dignity. We tend to think that privacy is about autonomy, about giving people their rights. But actually, if you dig deep, it's about maintaining the dignity of another. All right? Now, some of us will find some of those easier than others. I'm an optimist, okay? I'm always got big plans. I'm going to do it all, you know. So guess which one's the hardest for me? Fidelity, keeping promises, is the hardest one for me. And I have to watch it all the time. That's one of that muscular things in my life. Okay? Anybody got some thinking about what's hard for them? Some of us are extroverts. Keeping secrets is really hard if you're an extrovert, because you get your energy from your interaction with other people out there. Okay. Privacy. Some of us are great storytellers and great listeners to stories. We will burrow out a story if we can find one, especially if we're preachers. Okay, we're on the lookout for a good story. So these are the challenges that we face. Okay, so what's all that got to say about church council? Well, how many of you have read the regs on church councils recently? Some of you. I know why. But they're actually wonderful regs. And it's worth a look. And in the handout that I'll give you later, they are all set out for you about what a church council is about. So, right up the top, in Reg 3.1.2, the role of the church council is building up the congregation in faith and love, sustaining members in hope, and leading the congregation to a fuller participation in Christ's mission in the world. What's not there? What's not there? Pardon? Business, the property. Pardon? Finances, discipline. All those things are there in the next section of the regs, and all very neatly set out exactly what the role of a church council is. But over the top, overriding all of that, is this. And I wonder whether, if there's one ethic that we ought to take away, one principle that we ought to take away this morning, is how well are we doing this as church councils. Now, I think it's controversial because I think we've gone through change as we've changed the role of elders, or rather we've changed the composition of the way governance in the church works, and so we have, and I think what's happened by having elders part of church council, I think is wonderful, except what's happened is we've elected church council type people instead of elder type people. Does that make sense? Do you know what I'm talking about? That we have not necessarily chosen for church council because we know the decisions are tough, and you have to be very sharp and pretty grounded, and all those sorts of things to be a church councillor. And sometimes we forget the great saints of the church who may have something to speak into some of those really important things that we do. I'm not suggesting that all of you aren't great saints of the church, of course. Then as you go down the list, we come to this one, sharing with the minister in mission and in the pastoral care and spiritual oversight of the congregation. If you have a look, actually I might hand them out now. Okay, so when you look at, it's into the document, you'll see the church council on the 3rd page. How are we going? We've got a couple missing over this side. Thanks, Sandy. I want you just to notice the verbs down the list. This is an excerpt from the regs. Sharing, nurturing, making decisions, assisting, determining, carrying out, managing, arranging, managing, controlling. So they're verbs. And right up the top is sharing with the minister. And in the church, we often talk about covenant relationships. And I think that we, as a community, have forgotten what covenanting is really about. And I'm not talking about necessarily, it's the same issue, of course, and why we use that word for talking about our relationship with our Indigenous brothers and sisters. But covenanting is about a relationship that is elected. In other words, we choose it. It's most often a relationship between people who are not necessarily equals. In other words, they're not exactly the same. One will have a strength in one area and one will have a strength in another. So we talk about the covenant between Noah and God, for instance. So it's by choice, it's relational, and we often use family-type words and have family-type expectations around covenanting-type relationships. Okay? It's a relationship of mutuality and sub-obligation, and it's usually solemnified in some way. In other words, that's like the Hippocratic oath. We make promises to each other in a covenanting relationship. Now, it may be that I have a warped view of the world, but I think this causes enormous issues for us between church councils and ministry leadership when we don't understand what a covenant relationship actually means. Because we're so used to hierarchy, we're so used to one body having the say, that we find it quite difficult to work with the issue of partnership, of mutual respect. What about the ethic of nurture? Now, this is that figure of 8. I couldn't draw it last night, I'm afraid. This is what we've ended up with. So nurturing the members and adherents in their growth in grace is one of the tasks of a church council. So we do things like mentoring, listening, discipling, studying, encouraging, teaching, counselling in order to nurture the members and adherents in their growth in grace. But how often do we do the other cycle around our ethic, especially as a group of people? We tend to do it away from the group, and we might give lip service to devotions, 10 minutes if we're lucky. But actually, the flesh, if you like, of good relationships and good governance is around this journey that we undertake together. as a church council. And some of us are elected to church council because we're really good doers. And we might struggle with some of the other side of it. That's the ethic of nurture. What about the ethic of leadership? Doing things like deciding, managing, determining, arranging, disciplining. And once again, doing the cycle around the ethical principles. The ethic of dealing with our own stuff. Doing things like coping with my own history, acknowledging my own weaknesses, my own sensitivity to betrayal or being put down, my own human needs, my own interest in this. So there is work, there are things to be done. And how often do we take the journey in a reflecting way around how we behave in church council according to the ethic of love? The ethic of communication. We do things like speak, disagree, discern, use authority, deal with our anger, disappointment, frustration, anxiety. And we communicate that stuff. And one of the most, some of the most difficult church councils are those where there is no reflection about how we deal with that stuff, neither by individuals nor by the gathered community. There is never a conversation about how do we deal with conflict in this group of people. Is there a place where you cross the line in the way that you behave or not? And I know we all laugh at WWJD, what would Jesus do? That it's a bit cute, isn't it? And we've assigned it to the evangelical wedge of the church, and those who don't want to be part of the evangelical wedge of the church like to think it's funny. It's not funny at all, actually. It's a part of Christian discernment, and we don't do it. So, a code of conduct is a shortcut. Why bother? Isn't it obvious? Haven't we been learning about how then should we live all our lives in the Christian church? Isn't it second nature? Of course it is. Of course it is. Everyone became alarmed when they saw Mullah Nasruddin mounted. This is an Anthony de Mello story. Everyone became alarmed when they saw Mullah Nasruddin mounted on his ass charging through the streets of the village. "Where are you off to, Mullah?" they asked. "I'm searching for my ass," said the Mullah as he whizzed by. So whilst we might be looking for principles and guidance, we're actually riding them all the time. You cannot live life without an ethic, without principles. You just may not realise what they are. You make choices all the time, and you're making choices according to an ethic. It may not be one that on reflection you like very much, but you're doing it. With me? Okay. So it is part of living. The other thing that I wanted to use to illustrate this is some basic systems theory. From the work of Murray Owen and Friedman and Peter Steinke and others, we understand that the church is just like other human organisms and systems. Surprise, surprise. But the human system that we understand best is the family. So let's use that as an example. What Bowen would say is that the human family is rather like a mobile. That's a really, really crass attempt at drawing a mobile. But when Mandy was when she was baptised, actually, the church at Varden made a beautiful mobile off a coat hanger for her, and we have it to this day. And of course everything was hung off it and everything was beautifully balanced along the mobile to keep it all in what we would call in family systems theory in homeostasis. And so a family is rather like that. We find our position in relation to one another to make the whole thing work. So that we create that distance from one another and how much weight we might pull on the system in order to have our needs met and to keep the system functioning. Okay? So there are some factors that keep human systems working, and the first thing is roles. So in your family, you have things that make the family work, don't you? You have who's likely to cook the meal, who's likely to take the rubbish out, who opens the mail, who pays the bills, you know, all of those sorts of things. They are roles, and sometimes they just fall out, don't they? It's not like we had a great family conference and we all decided, although when our children were little we did, but no longer. They're well and truly ingrained. But there are roles that we all know about, and there are roles that we don't know about. And often these are the roles in relationships. And these are things like, in a family dynamic, you will have the blamer and the one who always complains. You'll have the placator, the one who's always trying to keep everybody happy. You'll have the computer, the one who sits back and just watches it all happen and makes the droll comments. Have you got one of those in your family? And you've got the distractor, the person who, often a child, who will make a fuss when things get difficult. It's a role in the family to make the system work. And some of these things are not comfortable. And they're not things that we choose in the way that we work together. We just know that it's needed and we do it. It's instinctive a lot of the time. So there are explicit roles and implicit roles. There are rules in the way that human organisms work. So, at home, some of the rules at home. Aha, yes. Pick up your wet towels. Okay. Any others? Look again. That's right. Okay, so there's some of the explicit rules that are spoken out, but there are rules in human organisms. If you want to delve into that and some of the emotion of it, pick up Sharonne Tan's latest book called The Rules of Summer. It's extraordinary. It's a picture book with very few words, but it describes the relationship between two brothers during a summer. And Sharonne Tan grew up in WA, and you can see that in his illustrations. But it's scary. They're actually scary. The rules are never leave a red sock on the clothesline. And then you see the picture of the two boys crouched in the corner of the backyard with one red sock on the clothesline and a giant red rabbit coming down the pathway at the back of the house. Now, what is that all about? It's about a child trying to work out what the rules are of life. And that you can't work that one out, but you get them by the end of the book. Never ask for an explanation. And there's a picture of him beating up his big brother, who asked for an explanation, obviously. Never wait for an apology. I invite you to have a look at the book later. So there are rules in the way that we behave. And I bet you know in your church council who's likely to do something or say something or take the lead in a particular situation. There are rules around what you can say and what you can't say in your church council. Would I be right? Yeah. And some of the rules are really good rules, and some of them are awful in the way that we treat each other. And often rules and roles are always interrelated. What burden we expect others to carry in the emotional load of living in community. We expect some people to take the lead, to take the responsibility. The third thing is norms. In other words, what we've got used to. And there's an awful lot of that in church councils and families and in every other organisation you've ever been part of. And some of them are really positive norms and some of them are not. How many have a whole group of their congregation turn up after the start of worship? Yep. Okay. Is it a bad rule? Is it a bad norm? Well, depends, doesn't it? It depends. Mostly it doesn't matter. Occasionally it really matters, and that's when you're in trouble. Yes. It's on the notice board, isn't it? And you've made your rule really clear because it's on the notice board. Yep, yes. Absolutely. Yes, we wouldn't like Qantas to work that way, no. And the fourth thing is communication patterns. And communication patterns are the oil in the system. That's what makes it all work. Because what happens to a human system is that when something happens to... let me see if I've got another slide. No. Is that when something happens to those individuals hanging off the system, say one comes off, or one gets damaged, or they get stuck, what happens to the system? Yeah, the balance is lost, and change is inevitable. Change is going to happen. And so a healthy human system will be able to move around that mobile, that coat hanger, with ease. So knowing what they are and how they work and having good communication enables us to move a little. We change our distance between each other and the weight we pull on the system. Okay? So you think about that in terms of what I'm actually saying about church councils. We change often our distance between each other and the weight we might pull on the system as this organism struggles to do God's work in this particular Christian community. Okay. So the point of all of this is we have rules whether we know it or not. We actually have unspoken codes that we may not have chosen but have evolved because we're a human community, and that's how human communities are. So maybe there's a responsibility for us as Christian community to really think about what are the roles, the rules, the norms and the communication patterns that are healthy for our church council. I'm not going to talk about that. James McBride wrote, "It's the absurdity of family life," and I've added, and church life, the raggedness of it, that is at once its redemption and its true nobility. So in this messiness of growing together, as we experience life together, as we grapple with what it means to be God's people together, there is a redemption and a nobility. So how then shall we live? Before we go on to that, I thought I might do a quick diversion to talk about Edward de Bono's 6 thinking hats. How many of you are familiar with Edward de Bono's? Oh, all of you. That's fabulous. De Bono talks about the way that different people bring different gifts and are more likely to wear particular hats in a social situation and in a human organism. And so I should have made slides for this and I should have written my notes. Let's see how my memory goes. So the black hat. What's the black hat? That's the person who always says no. Have you got any of those on your church council? It's usually the treasurer. Have you got a blue hat? The blue hat is the person who is always focused on process. Bruce End. Okay, you've got some of those. You've got the white hat, the person who always wants the facts. Give me the facts, give me the facts, nothing but the facts. Got any of those? The green person is the person who is always seeing possibilities, green pastures, okay? Seeing possibilities, new ideas, ways forward. A green hat, really important to have them. A yellow hat is the sunny disposition on your church council. Okay, you got one of those? I hope you got lots of them. And the red hat is the emotional person. Now, and so that person is not only the one who expresses emotion, but picks up emotion in others and is prepared to engage with the emotional issues in a particular situation. Now, I'd add a purple hat, because I think that there's a place in Christian community for the person who is always asking the God question. Where is God at work in this? Who's always doing the work of the theology for your group? And it may not be your minister. And the orange, and I put in an extra one too, an orange hat, being the person who is always working towards harmony, the person who's always the mediator. Okay, now the point of thinking about all that is I want you to think about your church council and to think about what hats are missing, because you'll be diminished in the quality of decision making and community if you've got hats missing. I did Myers-Briggs with one church council not so long ago, and you're aware of Myers-Briggs personality scale, all that stuff. And there was about 30 people there. It was an expanded elders and church council education thing, everybody all in together. And we did a show of hands about how many J's there were in the group. Now, you remember what a J is? A J is somebody who makes decision, who wants resolution, who sorts things out and has a tight time frame, gets on with things. Good decision makers, J's. Everybody except one person was a J. Guess who was the P? The minister. Boy, covenant relationships be really tough in that church council, I reckon. And that minister coped brilliantly. But what a P person is a processing person, somebody who likes to leave things open-ended, who says, well, that's where we've got to tonight. Let's sit on it and wait and pray about it, and we'll come back to it next meeting. Probably going to drive you mad when you're thinking about timelines. Okay? But what I would say is that was a real problem for that church council in lots of ways, because they didn't have enough balance in the way that they approach their work. Okay. So think about, when you're electing church councillors, think about what do we look like all together. And when you're in church council, think about what hat do I need to put on here, even if it's not my natural one, in order to keep this conversation balanced. If we've got 5 black hats, maybe there's a little bit of yellow or a little bit of green that might need to come out of the woodwork in order to progress us in a healthy way through this decision making. So when we get down to it, how then shall we live? A South Australian congregation asked me to work with them, and we came up with a very simple document. What we did was we tried to work out who we are at Riverview, made up name. Who we are at Riverview, what are the things that really matter to us, what are our values, what are the grounding ethics on which we want our congregation to be based. So, and this is what we came up with after a day and a half. The Riverview Uniting Church community commits to grounding its life in Jesus Christ, ensuring that Riverview is a safe place for all people, valuing every person, a community of nurture, participating in God's mission in our community. And so, if that's who we are and what our ethic is, what we will do, we will trust each other with respect, honesty and openness, exercise generosity, hospitality, tolerate and also enjoy differences, work at those things that we find difficult, listen to each other with care, checking out that we've heard each other accurately, remember to laugh often. So that's what they came up with as a congregation. Oh, pray, I should have noted, and there's a bit more. Pray diligently and seek the leading of God's Spirit. Hold our grievances loosely. This was a congregation that had been through a really rough time. Hold our grievances loosely, but seek resolution of conflict promptly and face to face. So what did that mean for the church council? Slightly different question. The Riverview Church Council commits itself to these things: seeking the guidance of God in all that it does, supporting the covenant of the Riverview community by its decision-making processes and behaviour. In other words, the Church Council wants to be consistent and congruent with the values of the congregation. Holding to the principles of courtesy, good communication, striving to understand will be core to the work of the council. This is a council where people have come to fisticuffs, okay? Actually, when Ian went to a new parish, it's a long time ago, he came home from his first church council and he looked a bit grey. And I said, "Oh, what on earth has happened?" He said, "Well, the chair of church council and the superintendent of the Sunday school stood up and were aiming to hit each other over the jaw." So there you go. It's been happening for a long time. And then exercising a gentle oversight for the whole community of Riverview. Dealing with conflict promptly and openly. Now, this was not something theoretical for these people. These are people who had suffered because conflict had been badly handled, and they knew it. Modelling good conflict resolution strategies and dealing with its business in a timely, fair and just manner. Okay. Now, Riverview did its own work, and that's why I titled this A Code of Ethics ? And why I've come down with a code of conduct rather than a code of ethics anyway, because a code of ethics sounds very deep, very well thought through, very complete, very academically right, doesn't it? And what I want us to do as a church is to engage more personally with this than to have a right document. There are hundreds of codes of ethics and codes of conduct in bottom drawers. And it would seem to me that the work that we need to engage in is actually the conversation, like Riverview did, around what it really wanted. What were the issues that were important for it? But what I have done, because I thought you might expect it, see, I'm a compliant person, is I've done the beginnings of a sample code of conduct for you in the handout. And it's a guide, it's a first try, it's a template for conversation. So what we have inside the front piece is the safe place policy of the Uniting Church. Then we have the regs about a congregation, and then we have the regs about the church council. And then what I suggest is that every community does its own piece of work about who they are. Now, you will have done some of this with your mission planning. It overlaps a lot with a mission planning approach. And some of it may seem really obvious to you. It may not, too. I would rather a really sloppy document and have had a really rigorous conversation in a church council about how they want to be, who they are, how they want to be, and how they want to work together. And so this is who we are, and hence, this is what our role is. This is who we are, and hence this is how we will behave. And so there's a sample on the last 2 pages. And as I was writing this, the list was getting longer and longer and longer and longer and longer. And I think, oh my goodness, this poor Riverview Church Council, fictional as it is. I should have chosen a different name for this document to that, because they are 2 different churches, okay? But I thought that when I'm putting together a sample for you, you ought to have the whole range of possibilities and things that are part of responsible governance and all of that. So in there you'll find things like maintain confidentiality, make decisions with integrity, justice and compassion, refrain from engaging in bullying, emotional abuse, harassment, sexual or physical abuse of any person or so forth. So there are things that are almost givens, aren't they? They're almost givens, but until we talk about them, we don't have a way of referring to them later. If I've signed off on something, then it makes it easier for you to talk to me about my behaviour. If it's part of our culture that we talk about who we are and how we behave together, then it's much easier to have the conversation when you need to. And you need to have the conversation earlier rather than later. It's much easier to have it with a mate than it is to have it with somebody that you're absolutely fed up with and wish, you could do away with. So, there it is. What I'm hoping to do with what you might tell me in the next 5 minutes is to work through to provide for you some study materials on particular nuggets of things that you think your church council could use some education on. What sort of materials would actually help you to grow into and become the community that you want to be? Where are the gaps in your understanding, in your experience? Any of this? What are the things that if we put in a document, you'd be able to say to your church, let's work through this, or let's get somebody in to talk with us about conflict resolution? Yeah. The Bible? I'm hoping you're getting a lot of that. Well, then that's a serious lack. Yeah. Pardon? Absolutely, and I hope you've got devotions. Every church council and that whoever does them is very serious about preparing that input for your meeting. There's a beauty. Yes, I could have talked about groupthink. It's a major issue. Do you want to have a go? Absolutely. Yes, in Olsen's discernment process, he has a lovely component in a discernment process that says whose voice needs to be heard in this conversation, or whose voice is not present in this conversation. And I think that's a really important question along the way. Maybe that's something that we could, maybe the discernment process materials is something that we could provide for reflection for church council. But yes, groupthink. Does everyone know what we're talking about with groupthink? That's when a group of people have been together so long and understand each other so well that they all think the same and that no one has the courage to step outside of the box. Will that do? Yes. When we're with this group of people, we think like this. When we're with this group of people, we might think differently. But when we're right in the rigidity, that's part of the triangle thing, isn't it? The rules and the roles and the norms and things. So, which of these things should we provide? I'll ask the question, keep on asking, because I guess I'm committed to trying to develop what you need.
To help is going about talking about who you are and strengths and weaknesses and how you relate to each other.
Yep.
Tools that we can use, for it.
Yes. A gifts inventory process of some kind. There are a few of them around. Yep. So understanding our strengths and weaknesses. Yeah. Yes.
Engaging with the congregation.
Yes.
Does a lot and engage the congregation to be involved in that process.
Yes. So there's some communication skills around that, aren't there? How do we express our own emotion with honesty without doing damage? And we need to practice that stuff. We actually need help with it, I think. Okay.
Setting priorities. Sometimes we get bogged down in the church council meeting about smaller things.
Some of you will be aware of eConnect, which is a newish e-news that comes from the Synod office now, and it goes to chairs, treasurers, secretaries of church councils and ministers. And so it's not e-news that goes to everybody, and it's not meant to be a social, this is on and that's on and that's. It's really to help church councils and ministers with the sort of things that are the work of the church, if you like. And so one of the ideas that I have is to add onto eConnect some little things like this along the way on a regular basis. So there's a little something that might encourage a church council to look at some of these issues about its life along the way. I think there's only 6 a year, so we're not going to be overwhelming you, that's for sure. Yes, Alan. Okay, yes, in fact that's the number one strategic plan item for our whole Presbytery Synod. So maybe it's time for us to put some lovely book by Stephen Covey Jr. around trust called The Speed of Trust with lots of terrific ideas in it. I need to stop. No, go on, Julie.
I was going to say, something that would be really helpful is when that latest e-connect about taking on all the responsibility of health and safety, the overwhelming feeling with the council members, we didn't sign up for this. So, something to someone from the church or coming out and helping councils understand their roles and responsibilities.
Yes, and in fact, I'm writing this down because I need to copy it later. But the Synod office is going to set out with what they're calling a road show, which is an attempt to have gatherings where some of the technicalities of some of those things can be explained. In the meantime, you can sign up for Called to Care with Linda Vinal, and she will work through not so much the technicalities but the underpinning principles for some of those things, and that's for everybody. That's not just for church councillors. All right? Look, I need to stop. Let me just close with an encouragement. It sounds like a lot of work to write your own code of conduct. Let me say, it's fun. That Riverview Church thoroughly got into it. We had butcher's paper around the hall, and we had voting processes, and people got to know each other, and they came to a place where we have decided something together. And that was healing in itself. So don't run away from it. And if it's too hard, ask for some help. Because it's my firm hope and prayer that life in your church council will be enriching for you, that you will grow in faith, and that you will demonstrate the qualities of leadership that nourish the community, God's people, by the way that you live and by the way that you engage with the work that you do. Thank you so much for the hours and hours of listening, working, planning, attending things like this, the pain that sometimes comes with responsibility. I think it was de Gaulle who said something about the not envying the weight of the cape of the king. In other words, the weight of the responsibility. And so we're aware that many of you carry those sorts of responsibilities. Thank you so much. You are in our prayers. God bless.